Alright, let's get started. So welcome to this masterclass on leadership assessment myths. I think this is a very pertinent subject, and we thought that it might be useful to bring this masterclass to you and throw some of the points which are important from a purist perspective and from an applicant's perspective that are very important to understand when we look at leadership assessments. A few important things about this masterclass. It is uh, since this is more of a class format, I will go on for about 30 to 40 minutes or a little more in terms of talking about some of the important things when it comes to leadership assessments, our own observations, my observations from the numerous exercises that I may have been part of, and also both from a purist and a practitioner perspective, what are some of the things that we necessarily need to do when we get into leadership assessments and how we do them in our organizations. So and that's the format. Request you to post your Q&A on the Q&A section, and we will compile them, address them one by one as we come towards the end of this session, maybe in the last 15 to 20 minutes. There would be a chat option available. You can chat as well, and you can post your comments there as we go along. So that's a broad format. It's more of a listening in, and we are sorry for that. We apologize for that, as you know, this format is not most suitable for interactive conversations, but succinctly putting things together into a perspective is what is the intention of this particular session. So straight away moving on to some of the important points when it comes to leadership assessments and sharing some of our experiences, some of my experiences. I think it is important to understand the leadership, the leaders' persona, the leaders' activities a little more in detail before we even get into the subject of the assessment. And are there any two leaders that we see alike? And you know, there was one thought I was having as I was working on this masterclass to put maybe 4 or 5 faces of different leaders. Let's say Steve Jobs in the Apple, or Mahatma Gandhi, or Martin Luther King, or you know, somebody like that. If you look at these different leaders, are they really alike? Are those situations alike? Are any two leaders ever alike? You know, if each of them may have their own strengths, may have their own ways of navigating through the complexity that they are managing, and not necessarily all that we see, you know, organizations with great practices coming together and getting into situations like Enron, which have leadership teams which tick mark or checkbox all the items that possibly would be there in the leadership frameworks of such companies. So what creates these differentiations, and what creates these likenesses? And when we look at leaders, how should we look at them when we're creating a pipeline of leaders for our own organizations? How do we look at creating such pipelines when there is so much of diversity? I will take liberty to say that uh, you know, leadership is the or leader itself is the segment of one. Each individual leader is very different, and the way he or she would navigate the organization may be completely different from his or her successor or his or her predecessor. And we have seen time and again that two very distinct personalities may still be very successful in navigating the same business. And you know, multi-generational businesses are the best examples of such a phenomenon, that you know, maybe in one generation there are leaders of one kind, and in the second generation the leaders of another kind, and both of them are equally capable and uh, equally successful in running the organizations, but in very different ways. So the leadership itself, the way the leadership works, doesn't remain same. and it changes based on situations. And since it is a segment of one, how can we apply generalized assessments? How can we apply generalized uh, tests like psychometric tests? How can we apply generalized principles to these situations? I think this is one of the important things that I feel is to be discussed here, and we should certainly look into it and see that in such scenarios what organizations should do and what organizations have classically been doing, which in a way may also be injustice to many people, which may also be leading to a lot of abusive leadership in respective organizations, because everything gets distilled to, let's say, competency framework, or gets distilled to some kind of a system, and then people know how to manage around those systems, right? People learn very fast. So it is very, very important to see that how do we, in this segment of one, create assessments, create leadership paradigms, which will make the organization succeed across generations, and not just looking at the here and now of the organization. Particularly when we talk about CXO positions, when we talk about CXO roles, when we talk about CEO role, and maybe even one level down to the CXOs, where it is very, very critical that we harness the full potential of people rather than segmenting them into generalized categories. So that is something that we have to avoid, and segment of one is something that is very, very important as we talk about more and more situations. Uh, Now, why are they not alike? Why are two leaders not alike? Because the circumstances are not alike, because the situations change, and because actions required in one sort of situations or one kind of situation may be very different from another kind of situation. So one would see that leaders have a repertoire of behaviors. It's not that they don't have one behavior. And again, therefore, classifying behaviors into certain competency doesn't make sense. Anger may be useful somewhere, care may be useful somewhere else, but there's a uh, repertoire of behaviors that a leader needs to showcase in based on situations, and therefore has to be more and more dynamic in that sense. And in addressing such dynamic nature of the issues, how can we then therefore again do assessments which are more and more generalized? So these are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves, as also we need to ask the practitioners who are around, who conduct assessments, also the organization's internal setup and systems, which creates the generalized systems around leadership from a high potential perspective or from a talent management perspective. So that is one important thing that we must look at today. And then, are there any perfect leaders? Is there a perfect leader? Is there everything positive, everything great about any leader? Jack Welch was a great leader in his own era, but some of the principles that he possibly applied then are less relevant today. So we can't say with any amount of or any even 50% or 60% of probability or possibility that anything is perfect. In fact, the research on the management itself suggests that none of the management theories, in fact, management theories are in a state of natural science the way it was in, let's say, 16th century, where everything was more ephemeral, everything was shaping, and that is where management science itself is today. There is no theory in management science which we can safely say is even applicable to two identical situations. Forget about many situations. So what seems to work in one situation somehow doesn't seem to work in another. So while there are pundits of, let's say, last time we spoke about OKR system, there may be pundits of OKR, and people will say that we need to create Google-like systems, but then Google is only one. Even Microsoft can't replicate, although they follow the OKR system as well. So so therefore there's no perfect situation, there's no perfect leader, there's only situations and circumstances which people have to deal with, and how uh, people deal with those situations is a very, very ephemeral or a very, very emergent process. So it's an emergent process, and in that emergent scenario, what behaviors will come out is based on certain is based on a complex web of situations and a complex web of the working of the mind that creates solutions in those situations. And we would see again that the two leaders of very different kind, one being a very flamboyant, outgoing, and one being very introverted, let's say, in the common language that many assessment organizations follow, may have a very different approach yet successful. There may be two exactly same scenarios, the same leader, but in one scenario one succeeds and the other scenario the same person fails. So it's a and that can be related to operations improvement in an organization. Tools and techniques are the same, but they don't seem to work uniformly across all organizations. So in different scenarios, the same person may behave differently and act differently, may be successful or not so successful in the eyes of uh, the internal leadership or the eyes of the external world. And at the same time, two different people addressing it very differently may also succeed. So both these scenarios are equally possible, and they actually happen all the day. In fact, uh, the research suggests that the if you look at the armed forces itself, the way the leadership is shaped and the way the generals evolve in the organization and the way they finally lead the organizations in their respective right, they respond to those emergent situations based on their grooming. Of course, that is very important. There are certain inherent qualities, we may call them qualities. I think that is the best way to represent them, because otherwise the moment we say traits, the moment we say anything else, it becomes generalized and becomes condensed. So there are certain qualities which are used uniformly, but those qualities are used in a certain context, and again those qualities may not show you success all the time. So there is no perfection in either leadership or leaders, and the same person or different people can deploy very different approaches or the same approach and yet succeed or fail. So why do assessment? Then how do we assess and why do we assess, and is there a mechanism that is simpler, more straightforward, rather than convoluted ways of just managing the processes, from some perspective of the reference frame or benchmark? Typically you want to, what happens is you want to base your decisions on a certain reference frame to appear fair, and that appearance of being fair creates all the infrastructure around testing and assessment. And how relevant is that for the culture of your organization is something that one should be very careful before you actually apply them, because they tend to spoil the culture of the organization, since there is no perfection, there is no perfect scale, there is no perfect reference to which you can say, okay, this profile, a certain psychometric test is better than another profile on the same psychometric test. So there are issues like that which one should be very careful. We try to be simplistic. We try to put a simple scale, measure 3 on a scale of 12 or 5 on a scale of 7, and then cook up a result which sounds plausible and fair to a large population, but usually people see through. What is fair and what is not fair is very visible, and if organize in the organization anything that is unfair leads to a very quick depreciation of the culture in the organization, which may lead to business outcomes of failure. So if there is nothing perfect, what about high potential, and what about high potential programs? If we were in a live session, I would have liked to invite some conversation here, but unfortunately we can't. But what about high potential? Is there something called high potential? Is there any relevance of this term? Is this creating good business results for organizations which are deploying these practices? Uh, is there high potential leadership programs? Is there real return out of it? So a research by HBR tended to suggest that 75% of the times high potential programs actually fail in the organization, or in the organizations that they research. And in the remaining organizations, there are other factors which actually lead to the success, which is about longevity of people in that organization, which is about a certain culture thread running in that organization, which is about the purpose of that organization, which makes people uh, uh, you know work beyond their potential or perform beyond their potential. So actually, in reality, it doesn't mean anything. In any case, now the other aspect of conversation here, when we talk about high potential, very interesting. What happens? So high potential will be like top 3% of your organization. What about the remaining 97%? Are they not potential? And how are they supposed to feel? All right, the HR people and the leadership team say that, okay, let's not tell people that you are high potential, but we'll work on you. We'll send you to Harvard, we'll send you to MIT, uh, and we'll not tell that whether you are high potential or whether you're not a high potential. But do you think that such kind of almost childish way of dealing with such thing will actually remain hidden? No. Everybody, we go to the organization. Oh yeah, this guy is the blue-eyed boy of the organization. He is a blue-eyed boy, or she is a blue-eyed person, or she is a blue-eyed girl. So high potential, whatever program you create, in any case disengages 95% of the people, and that is one big disservice that we do to our culture. Organizations which are not seen as trusted or fair anyways have a long way to go in terms of achieving optimum amount of productivity and optimum amount of uh, happiness for the people. So uh, now, therefore, I'm tending to say that this actually doesn't mean anything, and in the name of high potential, a lot of times, in my experience, a lot of times there is a lot of abusive leadership. Why? Because high potential is supposed to perform or get better results, higher results, and therefore there will be, of course, abusive leadership down the line where we will push people to get the results. And in that pushing of the people, you destroy the culture of the organization. And as the culture gets destroyed, your cost of resources increases on all counts, and return on resources reduces on all counts. So this whole paradigm of high potential is a fairly dangerous area, and unless the organization is very careful in choosing the program, very careful in retaining the culture of the organization, there can be a potential program. There can be potential program where everybody participates and is allowed to grow their potential. We have to somewhere, I'm not trying to get in the solutions here, but the point is that everything has to be decoupled. The role has to be decoupled with potential, and the potential has to be decoupled with uh, saying that only one kind of potential is the right potential, or there is a certain perfect kind of potential. So all these things are segregated. Roles are there as opportunities. They are of course grabbed by people who would have necessary qualities to pick up that role, but in essence these don't need to be linked. They are uh, and we don't need to create so many programs to make so many people busy, and also invest a lot of company money in actually managing some of these programs. And there's humongous bills which are spent on such programs with at times very minimum return on investment. Of course, they become a subject of great social media posts. They become a subject of branding, which is also equally good. There's nothing wrong with that. It becomes a center of branding that certain organization runs such a flowery potential program. So, but in a sense, from a perspective of from a multifarious perspective, they actually are somewhere very dangerous for organizations if they are just conceptualized basis the apparent level outcomes and apparent level systems in mind. Oh, certain company runs a high potential program and they are talking a lot about it. Why not we replicate it as well? It doesn't work that way. I think the one thing that the organization needs to focus, and this is the most important thing, one thing that the organization needs to focus on is its culture, where the average people become better performers. It's not the other way around. It's not about better people performing better so that the organization meets their results. It's about average people performing better, and that can be done only through culture and through practices. So practices that are uniform, practices that lead a person to easily achieve the outcomes. But by saying easily, I don't mean that the work is easy, but it's easier to interface with the system. There's no bureaucracy. You can reach out to anyone. There's a team-based culture. There's trust. I can pick up the call. This is a psychologically safe place. So those are the practices. And the work itself is very, very clear. How do we do this work? What is required to be done? Uh, if there is a problem, how do we solve it? If there is complexity, how do we address it? How do we innovate together? So those kind of aspects where average people can actually make a lot of difference is where the most important uh, point is when it comes to potential of the organization. We still need leaders. It's not that leaders are not required. You still need CXOs, we still need CEOs to run the organizations. But how do we choose them? How do we choose them wisely and not blinded by a certain psychometric or by a certain way of assessment? Because being in this industry for so many years, I must say that competency is not the right method. It is not the I will lose work, but I am willing to take that up and say that competency is not the right method of assessment. It is not going to give you any differentiation, and later we will see how this actually is a myth. So moving on, at this moment I would have ideally liked to take a pause, but let me just go on and for another 20 or so minutes, and then we get into the question answers. So this is the gist of what I have been trying to say. Assessments are done for the organization structure. That I have to maintain a certain structure, certain positions or roles which are CXO roles or CXO -1 roles. If the structure is not supported by mutual trust and is not good for efficiency, is not good for people, it actually is toxic. And it is toxic for both the society and the people who are working there. So structures have to create trust, and trust can come only when the way people are ascending in the system is fair. Unfortunately, and very unfortunately, the way we do assessments today doesn't inspire that trust. And although there may be agencies which may claim that we have a 0.7 validity or a 0.8 validity or 1 validity, but unfortunately people see through that whatever has happened is not exactly assessment. So how do we take these systems, and what are maybe some of the successful stories here? Are there companies which don't assess? Are there companies which are managing systems very, very differently and are still successful? What do they do? And how do they do things that turn out to be better ways of assessing people rather than relying on just an external report and rejecting or taking a candidate? So, so that's something that we should see. So from there, let's move to a few myths, as we promised as part of this masterclass as well. So what are some of the myths? What are some of the leadership and assessment myths? The very first, leadership can be condensed into competencies. It cannot be, and we have talked about it for the last 20 minutes. It cannot be condensed into competencies. Visualize it this way. Let's say you have Mahatma Gandhi in a situation many decades ago, maybe more than a century ago, where he faces something and reacts to that particular situation. The situation is emergent. He's thrown out of a carriage in a train, and that triggers a certain quality of behavior. Before that, the person is introverted. The person doesn't take interest so much in what is going on in the society and the politics, but that one trigger changes the paradigm. So it's an emergent phenomenon. We have seen business leaders like Steve Jobs failing, passing, failing, passing. It's an emergent process. Establishing Pixar, coming back to Apple, and then slowly taking Apple to a completely new paradigm. It's an emergent process. The person is an introverted person. The person is not so social savvy. The person is a scientist almost. We have Martin Luther King, who is leading a certain idea in the society, and it's an emergent process till he actually says what he says, and it becomes for almost a movement for the next few decades. So it's an emergent process. What do competencies do? They are the backward reflection. All right, this person is inspiring. All right, this person is collaborative. So this is almost the backward integration. Whatever we see in a person, we distill that and condense it, not realizing that condensation is good for a particular sense, particular event in time. It is not true for all situations. Uh, if somebody is leading somebody is a very detail oriented person, let's say, talking the competency language. This detail oriented person is working with a set of people who are new to the organization. Is that good or bad? Maybe it is very good, because those people will get to learn a whole lot of new things with this person, because the person has very high on detail orientation. The same person is designing a certain new product. Very important. This quality may be very important in that particular situation. So condensation of behaviors into competencies leads to good decisions is a completely is the biggest myth, first of all, of leadership assessments. We have to see the emergent nature of leadership and take decisions which is right for our organization and our context, not based on a certain paradigm of a psychometric saying that all right, on this he is 80 and on somewhere else this person is 70. No, that's not how we take. We should be taking our leadership hiring or leadership role, internal leadership role movement kind of decisions. So what works for us in the emergent situation we are in, and those emergent situations have an answer in 2 or 3 paradigms. I think I would discuss about it maybe in some other masterclass, but those paradigms are exchanges and relationships. Exchange and relationship with the market, exchange and relationship with the people who are surrounding you, exchange and relationship uh, with your ecosystem in terms of how are you doing business and how are you actually adding value to the society. So it's based on that emergent paradigm, and that is why it is very important to capture that as the important aspect while making such decisions. All right, so yeah, so in the last saying that, if competency score gives you a 50% chance as well, just toss the coin and take a decision, right? So leadership is emergent, cannot be condensed. Condensed processes are anyway not run by leaders. You have condensed processes. Let's say, for example, you are manufacturing a light bulb. There's a condensed process which is running on the shop floor. They are anyway not run by leaders. They are run by deep process experts. They are run by, in fact, nowadays, not even supervisors and managers, because digital and technology integration is doing away with that role. It's the experts who run the processes. So those condensed processes, they're deep experts of that area who run that. And therefore, it cannot be condensed. So in a nutshell, what I want to say is leadership competencies are condensed is not a right way of taking your leadership decisions, leadership assessment related decisions. The second myth is there is a superhero. I think this is one of the deepest, this is the root of human civilization actually, superhero. If we go back, to actually history of any civilization on this planet, let's say we go to Plato or Socrates 2000 years ago, since everything is so decaying, all the life is decaying, a paradigm of a perfect was created, that there is a perfect God, there is a perfect life, and that perfect life stills everything on earth. And that is what we continue as a paradigm even in our smaller organizations, that there is a superhero and this person is the CXO and therefore we achieve this. It never happens that way. So if we go deep down, Gandhi is Gandhi not because he is Gandhi, but because there are followers who believe that he is Gandhi. So people don't see the person, people see the belief, people see the goodness of the belief. Does their purpose match with their belief? Do they have determination to work on what they therefore believe, and do they have the discipline? So it's more about followers than leaders. It's more about followers than leaders. You replace one kind of leader from one generation to another kind of leader in another generation. Why does the business continue growing at times? Unless there's nothing massive changes up there, because people have a certain belief, people continue to work towards that belief, people associate with belief, and they're willing to change that belief so far as the influence is positive in their lives. So far as they believe that this will make their lives better. So that's what that's how the organization runs. Organizations run by followers. There may be these 5 stars journals, or there may be people in the press, those superheroes who we tend to look up to, but that's not what runs organizations. That's good for branding. That's good for giving a persona to your organization. Oh, my leader is Jack Welch. He is the Iron Man in G, but that is only good so far as it is about branding. When we look at the organization, it is much more complex, and it's much more about followers. In fact, there is an interesting research by an retired army general in the US, and they conducted a research on this particular myth of attribution as a superhero. They found that all those superheroes, and this is very interesting, all those superheroes had some set of great followers. And then when I reflected back to our own Indian mythology, uh, or actually any world order, we saw that each of these superheroes had a set of followers. 7 for Buddha, 2 for Paigambar Muhammad, 5 for Jesus Christ, so on. So there is a set of these 5 or 6 followers who have a strong belief in that person and who fill the gap. They bring those ideas to life. So it is much more about these followers and how deeply they are associated with the belief that that particular leader may be carrying. So it's more about those followers and the followers of followers who create the organization system. And this is why it is even more important that one follower is not seen above the other. There is no split of high potential and low potential and high performing and low performing, etc. It's more of a team which creates the system. The moment we start creating differentiation, followers will move away, and as followers move away, the leader is rudderless and likely to fail more than succeed. So we have to see that this whole collective human enterprise is at work. There's no one person, and even if there is a person, there are followers who are creating that person. So there's a lot of research on the followership theories. There's a lot of work done already, of course, in the leadership theories over the last so many centuries, actually. But there is renewed interest in this whole area of followership. What creates followership? How does followership come to life? And in our own research, we have felt that followership is always based on belief systems. And that is why working on the culture of the organization is so important. And you look at some of the greatest organizations which have sustained for a long time, Tata Sons as an entity, and there's some great news about them today. Tata Sons, let's say Toyota, some of these organizations which have lived through centuries and have succeeded generation after generation. It is the belief system which has been created. It's a belief which makes people feel good about the social system they are living. There may be problems inside, of course. There's no system without any. There's no perfect system, but belief makes people run, and that is where our focus should be, rather than on finding out that one superhero. There's no superhero. There are super followers, of course. So we can create super followers of the belief system, and those super followers can deliver results beyond the imagination of the organizations. And we have seen that, for in so many organizations as we speak. The third myth is about result, or people follow result-oriented leaders. In fact, this is where the most abusive leadership happens because of the systems that we create. We feel that we need result-oriented leaders. We need belief-oriented leaders, not result-oriented leaders, who increase the belief in people that something can be done, who can make average people successful. That's the kind of leader that is required. Result-oriented leaders often are one of the most, if we look at the theoretical background and the research work, the result-oriented leaders are somewhere also the most abusive leaders. And I think there are enough examples, even bigger examples, which I think I'll refrain from taking. But they are abusive leaders, and they create they create results for the short term, but in the long term, they actually spoil the culture of the organization. So what is required is belief leadership rather than result oriented leadership. And this elitist aspect of assessments has done a lot of damage. High potentials assessed very well. And there's one more interesting phenomenon that I've observed, particularly in assessments. The moment, of course, when we're talking about leaders, these are people with 20 years plus of experience. I have seen that on any psychometric, uh, there are so many psychometrics available. I've seen that there tends to be a higher desire for uh, being socially correct. At the lower level, you will see a lot of dispersion between qualities. But as people rise up and have 20-25 years of experience, know how to manage psychometrics, they give more socially desirable responses. And of course, in such situations, you have to probe more and more and get to the real behaviors. But the point is that most of the time we see people as responding more as socially desirable rather than their actual selves, and most scores tend to be high. That's an interesting phenomenon I've observed. So I won't take the name of the psychometric, but the psychometric is there, and then everything seems to be on the right, suggesting that the person is a superhero, superhero of the previous slide. So that is the important point that we should keep in mind, that actually assessments can also be faked. So what is therefore the right system of uh, carrying out assessments which give you better results maybe, and what is the simplest way of doing certain things? So then there's a question, why and how do we assess? I think I'm short of time, so I will run rather quickly here. But the principle is, and the internal organization should be capable of doing it. Rest everything is maybe just a supporting factor. We might do psychometrics. We can continue to do everything else, but not for assessment. It can be used for developmental purposes. The skip level manager, that's the person who has the biggest role in choosing the team. If that person is not taking accountability, then possibly they should not even be leaders or managers. Who should be on the team? What capabilities and what skills is the job of the skip level manager. If the skip level manager is not doing that job and is asking for an external entity to come and assess, then you already have a problem, because the accountability is shifting to an agency which is outside of the organization. The other important perspective, or the skip level manager himself or herself should be measured on time to autonomy. In how much time a new role holder is becoming autonomous. If the person is not becoming autonomous in 3 to 6 months, then this skill level manager himself or herself needs a lot of coaching. So this is the person who should know behavior science, and this is the person who should know how to assess, observe people, observe behaviors, and also take accountability for the decisions. So whatever systems we are trying to build around assessment, the ownership is with this person. Ownership is with this set of people, of course. There are, of course, variabilities in organizations. You can't have, in very large organizations, let's say there are 60,000, 70,000 people. Each time, maybe it is difficult to talk to, let's say, 3,000 skip level managers who may be there. So you create some innovative processes around getting people to the roles, which may be a set of teams approving, etc., etc. There may be creative solutions to that. But the point is that this is the population which should be taking accountability to build the organization. And if it is relying heavily externally on external judgment, then actually it is a disservice to the organization, and those people may not even be worthy of being leaders or managers. So That's the important aspect. The second important aspect is psychometrics. Relying on them, especially the new age ones that we are seeing mushrooming all around, is unethical. Painting a person, if we happen to read Carl Jung, if we happen to read some of the great thinkers like Elliot Jacques, they will actually tell you to refrain from psychometrics. Psychometrics is incomplete. Most of the time, as we were discussing, may also be socially desirable. It's actually unethical to judge people based on psychometrics. And we are doing a huge disservice to those people if we are saying that you are A type or B type or N type, whatever type, because types are not permanent, emergent. Behaviors are emergent. A very introverted person can react very offensively to certain situations. So behaviors are emergent. Behaviors cannot be classified into A type or B type. And therefore it is very important that we don't use them that way. At best, we use them as a developmental tool, and that too based on self-reflection. So it is very important that we look at psychometrics from a developmental and self-reflection perspective. Allow people the adulthood they have. Don't try to behave with them like a parent child and saying that, oh, you have this quality, you don't have that quality, etc. Let them self-reflect. Whatever is right in that particular psychometric will of course be assimilated by the person. Wherever the person needs help of an expert, should of course have an expert available, but there should not be these. The other thing with psychometric is that almost everybody is an expert. Everybody is expert at interpreting it. So we must take care that we are actually providing them experts in the form of skip level managers, they being very well trained in some of these aspects so that they can advise the people right. And potential. So one of the most interesting things is the performance conversation happens with your supervisor. The potential or your developmental conversation should happen with your skip level manager, and that's the person who should advise you like a coach how to kind of work on your development areas. And this battery of skip level managers therefore is very important. Many organizations fail here because of certain historical phenomenon. You appoint people out of turn, and then it becomes a suboptimal layer, and then this, because of this suboptimal layer, you get a consultant who will assess your people, and then you add further color to your system. So all of those things is something that the organization definitely needs to fix your organization structure. Get the right capable people in the right place. Don't get plugins for situations where you kind of plug in, because one system is suboptimal, plug in with another suboptimal system. So that's the point, and there's a point on psychometrics. Third thing, outside candidates. How do we do that? Many times we have standardized processes. These same leaders, they have to assess. They are accountable for the team. They are accountable for the business, not the HR. They are equipped with tools like Marketplace, who they can find out the candidates there. They can find the people who they want to hire. They assimilate them in their teams basis the requirement. Of course, with a general set of guidelines. You may have diversity guidelines. You may have culture guidelines. You may have repercussions of wrong hire. You may have all kinds of systems, but make the person accountable who is also accountable for the business to test what they actually want. Give them, of course, marketplace kind of solutions. Don't give them shortlisted CVs, or don't give them CVs to shortlist and take away their time. But point is that equip them with the right set of tools. Every test can just be an input. Judgment has to be from the hiring leaders, and their judgment is what should matter, not the assessor's judgment. And particularly in senior roles, while building the pipeline of leaders, you're recruiting for a position. After all the recruitment, you might give a person 3 years or 4 years or 6 months to kind of get the person groomed into the situation and then roll into the role that they are doing, of course. So all of that is good practice, but the ultimate accountability of success or failure of a leadership hire is of the skip level leader or the leaders inside, not assessment company outside. And what about the hyper programs? Replace them with trust-based systems, communities, and marketplaces. Most of the time, I think most of them can be actually junked in favor of more open systems. They actually are your culture eaters, maybe not relevant. You may have potential program, don't have high potential program, and start identifying people who 10 out of the 100 and spoil the culture of the entire organization as also the performance of the remaining 90. And these 10 anyway will not perform because now they are high potential. So avoid. I think this, even if you have to run potential programs, it has to be very well thought and researched before you actually institute in your organization. And then finally, how does one groom for leadership? What are preconditions for organizing the workplace? I think there is two facts which we have been discussing: emergence and decay. Uh, any system will tend to decay, so you need to bring in more purpose, ethics, values, beliefs which don't decay. I think Tata Sons is a great example of that, who have kept their ethics, values, beliefs, and purpose in the trust and the organizations for take the lead and follow. And while they keep on changing, transforming, what remains permanent is ethics, values, beliefs, and purpose. Develop servant leadership, psychologically safe, not abusive, and the leadership which is competitive leadership, not that, psychologically safe, positively hungry people. That is what creates great organizations. And then of course finally, making the average person the star. Average employee can perform better than the average employee in many other organizations. That is the differentiation. If we look at it from a competitive advantage perspective, it is not the stars versus stars of two organizations. It's the average versus average of two organizations. How good average engineers in Google perform versus, let's say, average engineers somewhere else. How well average engineers in all of them are not stars. How do average people in Apple perform vis-a-vis their competition? So the star versus star comparison which people end up doing, Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs, Elon Musk versus somebody else, is a completely farce argument. It's the average people who get compared in the two places who will be actually making a difference in their organization. So that's it on my part. I'm sorry. Yeah, so this is it, and here I am back on this screen. I hope the session was enjoyable. I'm available for any questions now. Okay, so there's a question on the screen. I will just talk about it. What all actions should be taken by HR or the leader if his subordinate is not accepting him or her as their leader? Now, as we discussed, leadership is about followership. And if there is a breakage in the relationship between the leader and the follower, there may be several uh, scenarios. What is the actual situation? We actually need to go deeper down into what is the trigger of such a behavior. Uh, why is the subordinate not accepting the leader? Is it because of knowledge superiority? Is it because of ego? What is causing this behavior? And uh, possibly, based on my experience, the counseling would be required for both, because there's something in the behavior of each which is not making them click. Assessment parameters for HR leader or tech leader. Now, when we look at technology leaders, or we look at So certain principles of leadership are very simple to understand. So in between I was talking about the exchange, I was talking about the way the relationship exists between people in the organization. So the most important aspect of leadership is my behavior, the way it is seen by others in the phenomenon of emergence. So when the situations are emerging, what is my behavior? How do I solve problems? How do I address to complex situations? Now this is something which remains uniform. Uh, the other thing is, how do I so being a technology leader, or I think there is a differentiation between technology and HR. But when I'm a technology leader, am I able to coach, guide the team to create certain solutions on or products? So leadership in a way plays roles both from a functional perspective as well as from the aspect of exchange and relationships. So the first thing is the creation of a psychologically safe workplace, whether it's an HR leader or a tech leader, where people can openly come up and ask questions. You are creating systems where people are are able to contribute without any fear, and that sets the fundamental. And then second thing is your compassion with people. So we talked about servant leadership, how compassionate you are. So taking a live taking an example from our own consulting world. At times we work with clients and the same question is asked to us 50 times, 40 times, 30 times, and so on and so forth. But how compassionately we answer it each time? Do we get irritated, or we compassionately keep on coaching the individuals who are trying to solve the problem? So that aspect of psychological safety and servant leadership is absolutely crucial. The third thing is, whether it's an HR leader or a tech leader or any other leader, does the leader is the leader able to create hunger in the people that are working in the team? Are they hungry to create something great? Are they hungry to create something new? And that is very critical. Of course, the technology leader comes with the domain expertise, because you will not be respected unless you have very good working knowledge of current practices in the technology space, and you're not forward looking from a technology perspective. If you don't do that, anyways you will not be respected. So you have to have that. And similarly for HR leaders, the contemporary practices, what is it that from a functional point of view, what are the contemporary practices? What are some of the things that are happening in the market which can make the lives of people better in the organization? Or you are sticking to the age old policy and practices based system? So we actually need to do away with some of those uh, things, and how contemporary we are in our thinking and approach is definitely a determinant of leadership. If you're relying too much on a past laurel, whether it's technology or HR or finance or any other field, it will not work, because things are very emergent and they move with time, and you have to keep pace with that emergence. So one thing that is we say that leaders are visionaries. What is that visionariness? That visionariness is about being contemporary, looking at things from today's perspective, not from yesterday's. That's visionary, because everybody is a visionary. There's nobody who is not a visionary. But you look at things from a contemporary perspective, not from a perspective of the past. And that is where it is very important that you are updated on your domain, and you are compassionate and servant and creating a psychologically safe place. So that's it on the questions. I think there were just two questions. We are also towards the end of time. Any other questions, anybody? You can type it on the window, and otherwise we can take a pause here and continue. Right? Okay. Thank you so much. We will take a pause here. Thanks for everybody who was here to listen into this masterclass. See you next month again with a new topic on something to do with people and management.